Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive. Today we're visiting with Houman Fakhimi in Orange County. He's the founder of his own firm, Fakhimi Associates, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about his firm. We're going to be talking about two important issues, criminal justice and criminal defense, as well as employment law. So let me introduce Houman to the show. Welcome to the show, Houman.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to Santa Ana to our office.
It's a wonderful office you have here. Tell our audience a little bit about your firm. What do you specialize in?
Well, I established the firm originally in 1998. It was just myself back then as a sole practitioner after working for another firm for a while. And I started my practice basically concentrating in criminal defense. I did criminal defense for about a year or so and eventually started to venture into other areas, civil litigation as well. I had another attorney join my firm, and by the year 2001, we had 3 attorneys in my practice, and we were practicing still out of Santa Ana at a different location. In 2002, I was presented with a really unique opportunity at that point. The CEO of a local public company, but back then was known as SimpleTech, a semiconductor firm, contacted me, and they had heard about me and they wanted to interview me to see if I wanted to become their general counsel. Well, at that point I had my own practice. I really had no interest in going in-house, but they convinced me that this will be the right thing for both of us. So for the next 5 years I left my practice. The practice stayed in place. Other attorneys were running it, but I became the general counsel to a company, as I said, SimpleTech Inc. There I sat in the board of directors, on the board of directors with them as a guest, not as a board member. I was their general counsel and oversaw the entire legal operations. We had offices here, we had offices back then in Sri Lanka and also in London. There I learned a lot about employment law and other facets of business litigation, obviously, but I really got to learn about employment law and developed a sense of interest in it. In 2007, when the consumer division of SimpleTech Inc. was sold off to Hitachi, I decided that I'm going to leave that industry again and I'm going to rejoin my old firm again, at this time as a managing partner again. So I'm back here again for the past 5 years. I'm still doing criminal defense, which is kind of my passion, but now I'm also developed a new passion for employment law, labor issues. I mainly represent employees, but I do have 2 or 3 employers who I still represent them.
What I have found when I talk to lawyers like yourself that represent a lot of employees, that when they win their cases, the employers call them up and said, how can we better our situation so we are not subject or vulnerable to these kinds of mistakes in the future?
That's absolutely right.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about your passion for criminal defense. What type of people do you generally represent, and in what type of situations?
Well, we represent whoever is under investigation for having been alleged to violate a crime or who is facing criminal charges. Mm-hmm. So as long as you are facing criminal charges or potentially facing criminal charges, you could be a potential client. And once you contact our office or a loved one, family member contacts our office, then the next issue obviously becomes whether we can help him, whether it's an area of expertise that we can help him, the location, whether it's a location that I can assist him or not. I practice in all state courts and federal courts in California. I have represented individuals previously in Nevada. So if it's a federal matter, it could be outside of California. But otherwise, any matter related to a criminal prosecution.
You know, in this country, there's the old saying, you're innocent until proven guilty. But oftentimes when people are accused and everybody around them think there must be some semblance of the truth, right? And that's kind of a traumatic situation, especially in criminal matters. What is the first thing you say to someone who is obviously shaken, because many times these people, this is their first brush with the law, right? What do you say to them to quiet them down, make them feel a little bit more comfortable?
Don't panic.
Yeah.
First thing is you cannot panic. And that old saying that's part of the Miranda warning, that anything you say can and will be used against you, it will be used against you. You really have a right to remain silent, and you should exercise it until you speak to competent counsel.
Now, obviously, law enforcement officials have a very favorite saying, well, you'd be talking if you were innocent. What do you got to hide?
Absolutely, absolutely. And
still exercise your right to be silent.
I absolutely, because you don't know what you say, how it could be interpreted.
Yeah.
And I have seen many cases, exactly as you just said, in which the law enforcement officers are able to get the individual to speak against his own interests, because they'll phrase their questions in a sense that you feel like, if I don't talk, I'm going to jail today.
Yeah.
Well, there's no guarantee. If you speak, you don't go to jail.
When I learned what I'm going to say in a minute, I was shocked, but I want everyone to know that police will lie to you. They have the right to lie to you, correct? When you are being interrogated, investigated, to prompt you to say things that you may never would have said, correct?
Absolutely.
How long when you're arrested, what happens?
Well, when you're arrested, what will happen is there is probably some kind of an investigation, or an officer sees you commit a felony or another crime in front of him, and then they'll arrest you. They'll put you under arrest, and they'll take you into a station, and they'll start questioning you. You have a right to remain silent if you're under arrest. Now, a lot of times police officers will say that, well, when we questioned the individual, we didn't read him his rights because he wasn't under arrest. So that's an issue that's litigated in courts all the time.
So how, if he's not under arrest, why can they hold him?
That's exactly the point.
So if a person is not under arrest, and we see this on TV like Law and Order, you'll see people ask the law enforcement, the police officer, they'll say, am I under arrest? And if the officer says no, they can get up and leave, can't they?
They should.
They can. I mean, they're legally allowed to do that, right?
Absolutely.
So if they're prevented from leaving, then they are under arrest. Is that right?
Then they are under arrest, and obviously a whole host of rights attached to it. One of them being, if they're questioned, their rights have to be read to them. Number two, they have to be brought in from a magistrate within a certain amount of hours. So they can't be taken into court, into jail, and held indefinitely. They have to be arraigned within a certain period of time. They have to be provided with bail. They have to be provided with an opportunity to argue for own recognizance release. Those are all the rights that attach to it.
Right. I think a lot of people are under the misconception that if you are innocent, or if you have really not committed a serious crime, there are people in law enforcement and the prosecution's office that sometimes, because they're kind of jaded, right, lump you in with so many other people, and sometimes you end up pleading guilty or taking a plea to a far worse offense than you should have, correct?
Yeah, there are many people, unfortunately, who plea bargain their rights away and enter into plea agreements which will have severe consequences for them, because they're afraid. They either can't afford a competent attorney, they are afraid that if they go to trial and lose, they could be facing a lot more time than they're facing, than they potentially could get from a plea bargain. So they will go ahead and enter into a plea bargain, whereas a competent attorney, someone experienced in the field, may have been able to completely get rid of the charges for them.
Right. In Southern California, we have a large population of illegal immigrants. They're arrested just like everybody else. Do they have the same rights, and how does that affect their immigration status?
Well, thank God they do. Thank God we live in California, and they do. And yes, they have the same rights. The entirety of the U.S. Constitution applies to them. But what will happen is, if you're arrested and you are here, you're an undocumented individual, and the jail facilities realize that, what they will do is they will contact ICE. And ICE will, which has replaced immigration, INS,
Right.
and ICE will decide whether to put what's called a hold on them. If an ICE hold is placed on you, that means even if the case is dismissed against you, let's say the district attorney calls them up and says, we're going to dismiss this case in its entirety, the ICE hold prevents the jail from releasing you. What they will have to do then is transport you to an ICE facility within a certain amount of time, and then a judge sitting there has to decide what to do with you.
Do you handle cases where people are locked up in an ICE facility?
I handle a lot of cases, and that's actually an area that I think I have a lot of knowledge about, is the effects of a criminal prosecution on your immigration status.
Yes.
So I'm routinely called upon by immigration attorneys who will call me and say, I have a client who's in jail, there's an ICE hold on him, I only handle immigration cases, can you handle this until they go to ICE?
Right.
Once I'm done with that aspect of the case and they go to ICE, then no, I don't handle that aspect of it.
Right, because, go ahead.
But as you know, there was a case a few years ago called Padilla versus Kentucky.
Right.
Which is a very...
This is a guy that died in jail, isn't it?
No, this is a case about a guy who had been convicted of drug possession with intent to sell years back. And he finished his time. He came out. Back then he was released and he had a green card. And immigration put him through deportation proceedings, wanted to deport him because what he was convicted of is a deportable offense.
Felony.
Not only a felony, but a deportable offense. You can have an aggravated felony, gets you deported. Crimes of moral turpitude get you deported. Anything related to narcotics gets you deported. That's what many people don't realize. Anything related to narcotics can get you deported. So this gentleman was about to be deported when he came up with this defense saying, look, when I pled guilty 10 or 15 years ago, my attorney never told me that I may lose my green card because of it. They went and looked through the plea bargain documents, and there was nothing there advising him of it. And the Supreme Court held that that's ineffective assistance of counsel.
Really?
Mr. Padilla has a right to go back in time and withdraw his guilty plea. And he withdrew his guilty plea. And
but then they had to resentence him, didn't they?
And
Or they had to retry him, didn't they?
You know, that's what I've been looking for. No, they didn't. And
Yeah.
that's what I've been trying to find out, what happened to Padilla.
Yeah.
So now I get a lot of calls from people who pled guilty years ago.
Really?
And they want to see, hey, can I set aside that guilty plea? My old attorney may be dead now, or he is willing to come forth and say he never advised me. The plea bargains.
And these are people in deportation hearings.
That's correct.
Are you handling some of those cases now?
We are handling a few. What has happened in the past few years, though, many counties, their plea agreement, they call them TAL forms, which is the agreement you do when you sign away basically your rights to fight the case.
Right.
Nowadays, have a big portion, in boldface saying, I understand pleading guilty here exposes me to being deported.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, and there is nothing on the record in which the attorney or the judge told you, Mr. So-and-so, by pleading guilty today, you could lose your residency here, you may have a case to set it aside.
What are some of your most common cases in criminal law that you handle right now?
I get called on to handle sex crime cases a lot. That's an area I've been involved in for years. I do a lot of possession of narcotics with the intent to sell. Nowadays, I have received probably 7 or 8 calls in the past 7 months of people coming into the country from abroad, mainly from the Middle East, but also from other countries, who are being detained at LAX and charged with possession of drugs for sale. And the drugs we're talking about is prescription drugs, like Xanax.
Who are they being detained by?
Well, as you know, for instance, let's talk about Xanax. Xanax is a prescription drug.
Yes.
And you can have a prescription for it, but it's a very popular drug on the streets. It's a drug most people use after they've partied all night to bring them down. So it goes hand in hand with cocaine and methamphetamine.
It's an opiate, kind of.
Kind of, yes. Not only that, a lot of people take it for other reasons. So it has a value on the street. And a lot of, for instance, I've had many clients, women, elderly women in their 60s, who are being arrested because one of them was caught with 700 pills of Xanax.
That is a large number of pills.
That is a large number of pills.
For any one person to carry.
For any one person.
Yeah.
But if you consider the fact that, for instance, she bought these overseas where they're much cheaper.
Okay.
And those 700 probably cost her maybe $700. If she wanted to buy those here through a pharmacy, it would have cost her $5,000. Even if she had insurance, it would have cost her a couple of $1,000s.
Did she also have a prescription for Xanax?
Many countries, as you know, including, I believe, Canada and Mexico, you don't need prescription to buy these drugs.
Really?
You can walk into any pharmacy in Mexico and buy these. Same thing in many countries in the Middle East. So these people are getting arrested here. I personally really believe this is big, and the fact that this has started in the past year is pharmaceutical companies are putting pressure on the government to prosecute these cases.
Because they don't want the cheap drugs coming in here.
Exactly. We've had every single case dismissed so far.
You have.
Because we were able to show these are people who use these medicines.
Yes.
They have prescriptions from those countries. There are doctors who told them to go buy these drugs.
Did they confiscate their pills? Like the woman with the 700 pills.
In that case, they did. In the 2 other cases, they released the pills to them. We were able to show these are people who need these drugs. They're not bringing it for any other reason except personal use.
So the type of cases you're handling right now are sex crime cases. The cases you just mentioned with the prescription medicine. What other kind of cases do you do?
You know, we run the gambit. We do white-collar crime.
Yeah.
I do murder cases. I'm handling about 3 murder cases right now. I try not to take more than 2 or 3 murder cases a year because those are cases that you really need to devote a lot of time to. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of gang-related cases and the gambit of other criminal prosecution cases which you can have.
There are 3 particular subjects that you definitely want to talk about. One of them was sex crime registration and if it works. Your thoughts?
You and I were discussing this before the show. As you know, with the new statutes which were passed and the proposition which was passed few years ago, sex crime registration has become very onerous right now. And because of the laws and how far you can live from bus stations, from schools and parks, locations which presumably children may congregate. If you're convicted of a crime involving sex crimes, you can't live a certain distance away from these locations.
It's 2,000 feet,
yeah.
I think.
And like we talked about, the city like San Francisco, for instance, you can never live there.
Right.
And many cities around here, you can't live there. So number one, what it's doing is pushing these people who are convicted of these crimes out into the boonies, basically, where law enforcement doesn't really have any access to them.
And can't find them.
Can't find them, can't know what they're doing. And number two, many of these people who are accused of sex crimes, for instance, it could be statutory rape.
Yeah.
Generally, statutory rape doesn't require registration.
It doesn't?
It generally doesn't. You can get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if the DA wants to be hardcore on you, they can require it. So let's imagine you're an 18, 19-year-old guy. You're dating a girl who's in high school and she's 17 or 16. And you guys are having consensual, sexual relations, but for some reason you're prosecuted. And now for the rest of your life, you're considered a sexual pervert and you have to register. Is that fair? I mean, look at what it's doing to that guy's life for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it's kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
It is.
It's so extreme. So where do you see this being changed? Because as you know, no politician ever wants to run on a platform of changing that because he'll be classified as soft on crime.
I think what will have to happen, I don't think it will ever change, to be honest with you. The way it is, unfortunately, we will in the future have more crimes against children.
Yeah.
And each of those crimes will get a lot of attention on cable TV. Mm-hmm. And it will rile up the voters to the point that I don't think anyone is ever going to propose amending these laws.
Right.
So I don't think it will ever change, unfortunately. Right. What I can recommend is if you're in a situation like that, make sure that you put forth your best defense.
Yeah.
And bring everything to the table to try to avoid having your rights, foreclosed upon so easily.
There's another subject that you wanted to talk about, which was plea bargaining and its effect on justice. And as we speak about that, I heard on NPR this morning that the guy that murdered, 12 people at the theater opening of Dark Knight in Aurora, Colorado, is having more charges added onto his list already, which numbers something like 140 charges. And I'm thinking, how much money is this costing? Talk about plea bargaining in general. Is this justice? Do we have to do that? And also, it's a well-known fact that per capita in this country, there are more people locked up than any other country in the world. So is that justice? It's
a really good question, and even though most of If you ask that question from a lot of defense attorneys, they will say they're against locking up as many people, and I am too. But I'm not sure if we can categorize it in such simple terms that we just have too many people. We have part of the reason is because we have more crime in this country. Because of the nature of our society, more crime is committed. But going back to the plea bargain issue, I think plea bargains have to be part of our criminal justice system. Without them, you are going to have many people who don't deserve to do 4 or 5 years of prison time doing 4 or 5 years of prison time. And what does that do to you, to that person? And once that person is released into society, what does it do to society? I do quite a bit of federal work. And in federal law, as you know, there is a sentencing guidelines.
And those are generally drug crimes, aren't they?
There are drug crimes, there are RICO crimes, there could be, with regards to mail fraud, things like that. White collar, yeah. Sentencing guidelines in federal courts until a few years ago were mandatory. So the judge really had no discretion. They had to give these people prison time. Whereas in a state law, the judge can really look at a situation, look at all the facts, and impose probation and a certain amount of time. That flexibility, I think, it has to be provided to the judges and the DAs and the attorneys and probation department, because they're in the best position to determine how much time is best suited for the case.
Right. Are judges taking into consideration that in California state prisons, for example, the U.S. Supreme Court has said there's overcrowding? Are judges taking into consideration in this state right now that you really can't send everybody you'd like to prison because there is a court order right now, a federal court order, to reduce the number of people in state prisons in California?
The legislature dealt with that, and it's called realignment. AB 109, which was passed in 2011, basically provides now that anyone sentenced after October of that year to crimes which are non-violent, non-serious, and non-sexual. They call it non. And the person doesn't have a prior history of a violent crime. Then that for committing that crime, and if you want to, and if the judge wants to sentence that individual, you can sentence that person to county jail, not state prisons anymore.
But the maximum term in a county jail is what, 2 years?
It used to be maximum term in county jail was 1 year.
Right.
Now it could be as much time as possible. Counties don't like it. Counties obviously
do they have the facilities?
They're getting a little bit more money, but they don't.
Yeah.
Many counties, I know the sheriffs in Los Angeles is not happy with it because they're saying because of the overcrowding, they have to let people go.
Substantially less than what their term of sentence is, isn't it?
Exactly.
So a guy could be sentenced to a year, end up doing 30 days.
There are many people in Los Angeles and in Riverside who are sentenced to, like you said, a year or 6 months, and they're doing way less than that.
Yeah. One final question in regard to criminal defense. Sure. People are watching this, and they see you're very knowledgeable and experienced. Why should they select your firm over the many other firms out there to handle a criminal defense problem?
Thank you for raising that issue. Nowadays, you can go online and easily go on Google and put in criminal defense attorney and just put in even my city, Santa Ana, for instance, in Orange County, and hundreds of law firms will come up. What we feel that distinguishes us and myself is that over the past 15 years, we have dedicated ourselves to litigation. We litigate our cases, and by that I mean that from the first day we get on a case, we start asking for discovery. We have our investigators, many of them who are former police officers, literally helping us read the police reports, contact witnesses right away, contact the proper agencies to get more discovery, and more, by discovery I mean police reports, photographs, any other evidence from them. I deal with a lot of alternative sentencing facilities locally, which could come and interview our clients and see whether they would be a good fit for them.
Like diversion programs?
Like diversion programs. Right now there are many alternative programs out there which could basically kind of be inpatient programs, and you can go to the judge and say, look, don't send my client to prison or to jail, sentence him to this facility which he will get treatment. He won't be a burden on taxpayers, he will also get education, and he will be locked down. In order to sell that to the judge, though, you can't just go there and say, give it to my client. You need to prepare that. There are cases in which we literally put together binders about our clients and why they're a good fit. So we give every client 110%. And number two, we are trial lawyers. We're not afraid to go to court. We're not afraid to try cases. And the district attorneys locally and state-wise know that we have good relations with them. I don't believe in burning bridges. I believe in showing your competence, and that'll be reciprocated. So based on our competence and our experience and our know-how, I think we're a right fit for the majority of individuals who are looking for representation locally.
It seems that over the last 15 years you have earned and learned a lot of experience in handling both employment as well as criminal defense cases, and I think that and that alone should make someone feel comfortable of selecting your firm in handling those two areas. And I really appreciate you spending time with us today, and we certainly hope you have come back again.
Thank you, Steve. It was very good meeting you.
You're welcome.
See you.